spite of money having been paid under the emergency cover, Office of the Attorney General says it has not received the shares and does not even know who the money was paid to. This is Ken Ochuodho. And now we have a new Solicitor General, right? This is the former Solicitor General. The government does not have 100% shareholding as per the current arrangement. The government has 39.9% and 56% of Jamhuri holdings. There's a skunk that is emitting some very toxic stench from Telkom Kenya. And this is what we want just to delve deeper right now and focus on. What is happening with Telkom Kenya with this particular day? Because we woke up one morning, I remember, and we had a splash on the Business Daily that, oh, you know, Helios has taken off, you know, and now Telkom is reverting to government. It was a huge shareholder within Telkom Kenya. There's a lot that has been happening. Let's just begin from there to just get the feel and flavor of Telkom Kenya today and where it's headed.
Debal, you know, even though we talk of digitization, of course, that's got to do with Telkom as well, ICT. There's also, you can have digitized corruption. The fact that it takes, for example, 2 years just to incorporate. We did register Africa Diaspora Alliance in this country. It took us 2 years. In Rwanda, like 3 days, it's all done. Even opening a bank account. In fact, we went to a bank that took us about 6 months or 8 months to open. We gave up, went to another bank. At least within 2 weeks, we were able to get it. But why should it take even 2 weeks to open a bank account when all the data is available? So in terms of digitization, improving the environment, you know, if the process is wrong, digitizing doesn't make it better. But having said that, now that you are on Telkom, often when I meet my graduate students, I use 2 cases, Zamtel or Celtel Zambia and Telkom Kenya, on cases of how not to privatize state corporations. Telecom Kenya is a classic case. And I remember at the time that it happened, almost more or less the same time, Ghana Telecom was being privatized too. If my recollection is right, it was sold to, I think, either Vodacom or Vodafone UK or something. The figures I may not remember precisely, but I remember while Telkom Kenya was divesting 51% then for a song, Ghana Telecom was getting much more for less than about 40%. And I was asking myself, why is this happening? I think a lot of it has got to do with governance, which is a big problem we deal with. If anything required investigation or interrogation, I think the case of telecom privatization, the case of problems at Kenya Airways and all, are issues that require checking out. Where did the monies go? So, Telkom Kenya, and having been at the heart of 1998, I keep telling friends, for me, what I consider my biggest contribution to Parliament was to push for and convince through what we were calling progressive MPs. Initially there were 6, they grew to 20, pushing the communications law of 1998, which is really the anchor law to date. It's the law that it had been rejected twice, in 96 and 97. So at the end of 97, when the 8th Parliament came in, and for me, that was like my singular duty. How do we convince? The MPs then were saying, look, we don't want to privatize, we don't want to liberalize, we don't want to give out our national sovereignty to foreigners. That was the thinking of the majority of the MPs before us. But I'm glad with the Communications Act, Telecom Kenya, which is my former employee, by way of declaring interest, was split, gave birth to CA, Communications Authority. Of course, I have another issue. How come we always have journalists, lawyers, accountants running institutions that belong to the informatics space? But that's or engineering space.
Hey,
that's a story.
You have a special language with that.
That's a story for another day. But having said that, it gave birth also to Safaricom, and of course the story of M-Pesa and all. I mean, looking backwards, I think it was the right thing to do to liberalize the sector.
But the transition also to Safaricom was a bit very murky.
Yeah,
Could there also be the genesis of where Telkom is today?
It was.
We have Safaricom, which has become bigger than all.
Yeah, it was.
And in terms of, you know, the launching part being the Telkom itself, which will have been. With the Mambo Tolea, I remember there was something like
Mobitelea.
It was Mobitelea.
Yes.
Yeah, and the scandal around it as well. Could that be also the spawning ground of where Telkom is today?
It's the same case, the ball of governance I'm talking about and corruption in all this.
I think you have more than you're telling
was
us.
Telkom Kenya Was Telkom Kenya valued correctly? I don't think so. Telkom Kenya had a lot of infrastructure. Recently, if I'm allowed the ball to say, I went into a studio of the public broadcaster. I was impressed to see what's happening because a public broadcaster has got so much infrastructure, so much asset. The same would be said of Telkom Kenya. It had so much asset, but because of maybe vested interest, undervaluation, you know, people were sacked from jobs. If it was done properly, not so many people needed to lose jobs. Their pensions probably to date haven't been paid. So, in a nutshell, for me, Telkom Kenya is a classic case for those who want to study on how not to privatize.
Right.
I think the privatization and then re-governmentization, for want of a better word, I think the whole process, when you look at it, and what you've got to go through is part of the problem. And you talked about the time that it takes for you to register a company,
Right.
the time it takes for you to change ownership, etc., is mired in a whole series of processes. Now, 6 billion, when there is that to be processed and permissions to be obtained, my pen can refuse to have ink at this amount of money, right? Until I get golden ink in my pen, then I can sign, right? In the company's registry, right? 5 years ago, we were getting horror stories that we thought it was digitized and everything else, and so, you know, you could trace the movement of permits. There were guys who were saying, let's meet for a drink, and says, if you want me to press the enter button on my computer, you have to pay.
It's hanging.
Yeah? So you thought digitization was going to get rid of this. My finger is worth a lot of money just to press that thing. Yeah? So,
and delete.
Yeah. So when you look at this, I mean, Telkom,
Digital corruption.
yep,
I know.
Telkom, the reason investors went in, private sector investors went into Telkom for a very good reason. The opportunity in terms of the assets that Telkom presented to a private investor were huge.
Sure.
It's got the largest fiber optic network in this country.
Right.
Nofbi. Right?
Sure.
And that was meant to take internet every single village, every single county headquarters, so that you could now digitize government. That was Telkom's key role as a government entity that was supposed to help develop a country. And that's what a parastatal like Telkom should be doing, is working in that space. But then when it couldn't work, they thought, right, we need to get a private investor who came in, looked at all this and said, this is a great opportunity. And in terms of just having that fiber optic network, the investment required now to begin to make money out of it, compared to the value of the investment it has on the ground, is not that big. Because all you need is now to begin to get a whole network around each of the nodes that have been developed on the national network, right? So I go to Kitui, right, where there is Nofbi has reached. Now I need to digitize Kitui, right? Now, if I want to digitize Kitui, what would I have to do? Work with the county government. Is that an easy thing to do? No. So as an external investor, I come in and I look at this opportunity. It is great. But in terms of transforming it into what I thought was an opportunity, the hurdles that you have in terms of doing that are huge. So what do? You say, guys, let me cut my losses and run, right? But the running was what the 6 billion back. So you buy back whatever it is that you sold for a song at a high value. Because for me, I put my money in, I moved so far, and you got to pay back on my return. Plus, also, the fact that I was expected to make so much, but you guys have made it impossible for me to make it. Right? So, control of Telkom would have actually been the control of the whole infrastructure that the government relies on. And that is why you hear all this issue about the IEBC, whatever it is, and so forth, because that's the infrastructure that partially their systems were running on.
Sure.
Yeah. So, if I have extracted 6 billion and I've now got to give it to this investor, what internal processes does the government need to go through to release that money to the external party? I can tell you, and I've not been inside government myself, that process is complex. And whilst I may have appropriated the money for that to happen, the actual movement of that money to that person will have hurdles and hurdles and hurdles. So once it has been taken out, that person has probably not received the money. So in the company's registry, right, it is still the same because the money has not got to where it was supposed to go. That's my simple, my layman's take on why this question is happening, is because the internal processes in government have not happened yet to release that money to Helios, so that now they can go to the company's registry and say we are no longer shareholders in this place. So let us understand and look at the process internally in the government first.
So the issue is a glacial slowness of the system.
Yes, that's my take.
So there's no
That's one angle. Yes.
Yeah, that's my take. That's my take.
And maybe it's not giving in government equivalent to being part of the deep state.
Yeah.
Let's hear from Bunyasi.
Thank you very much. I think this telecom thing and the Helios is being made to appear like a mystery. It's probably not a mystery.
It isn't.
And I would really expect that the media should do a slightly more diligent job. And maybe they'll face hurdles in getting information released. But it did happen overnight. There was pressure to release that money, for the money to leave a certain, to perhaps off, to leave the bank account and move somewhere where it would again be moved more easily. But it could have started in the last 3 hours of the last administration. This being in the public domain, there are very many people that need to sign on. They can give you a detailed tracking of where that money is, I can bet.
So you think the whole issue is being politicized?
No, it's not being politicized. I think it's being underreported, I would say. The fact that it's come out and it was the dying hours of the last administration may appear political, but I think it's just the timing of it, as it were. But there was reason to push it to be done by midnight of a certain day, certain hour. There was massive reason. If it delayed beyond that, then they could not be able to initiate the movement of the money. And they were concerned about that. Now the question is, was the money actually moving to deal with the transactions as now being reported, or were there other factors that were at play? And I'm a bit disappointed that Parliament hasn't called in Ukuri Yatani, the former finance minister, hasn't called in the central bank people because they will know this, hasn't called in all the actors, even the former president, because now he's a citizen. Go to his home and interview him there and listen to it, listen to the story. What happened? Why were they pushing it? Were there any reasons to be pushing? And maybe around the table here, knowing how much these guys know, they know a lot more than they will share at this table. And that's part of the problem.
So they're being cagey a bit.
That's part of the problem.
That's part of